Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are setting the clock back to 1912.
Mm.
And this is a year that really stands as this uh, absolute hinge point for the entire 20th century. When we looked at your stack of sources, it just became so clear that this was a moment where, incredible technological hubris and profound political certainty just shattered, both at the same time.
It's a remarkable convergence of events, really. I mean, 1912 is often remembered for one huge tragedy, but the scope of global change that year was just staggering.
Right.
So our mission today is to look beyond those famous headlines and really understand how these global shocks, the end of empires, the limits of technology, how they fit directly into the political earthquake that redefined the U.S. progressive era.
Absolutely. And the centerpiece of this deep dive has to be that extraordinary four-way U.S. presidential election. You had an incumbent, a former president running on a third-party ticket, a Democratic challenger, and a determined socialist.
And all of this was unfolding against a background of just stunning global drama. The sinking of the Titanic, the end of China's entire imperial system.
And a race to the bottom of the world.
Exactly. So we connect this to the bigger picture for you. 1912 is really the moment when humanity's faith in its own progress, in its own political permanence, just collided with the brutal, undeniable reality.
And the debates that came out of that collision, they fundamentally changed everything.
They did. They changed how America approached industry and governance. And these are debates, by the way, that are still happening right now.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with those global headlines because nothing captures that collision of confidence and tragedy better than the RMS Titanic. She sank on April 15th.
And it just completely dominated the news cycle for months. It
Mm.
was. It was more than just a large ship sinking. It was a profound psychological shock.
How so?
Well, the Titanic had been marketed as the ultimate symbol of industrial achievement, of safety, of human ambition. People genuinely believed that technology had made certain dangers, a thing of the past.
That illusion of invincibility.
That illusion was shattered in the middle of the North Atlantic.
I remember reading those accounts of the immediate aftermath. The sources really highlight the sheer disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
The White Star Line executive in New York, Philip Franklin, he kind of summarized the era's hubris perfectly. After getting conflicting reports all day, he finally just said, "I thought her unsinkable. I do not understand it."
And that confusion was made so much worse by the limits of communication at the time. I mean, early headlines were pure speculation.
Right, because the information was so slow and fragmented.
Exactly. You see these speculative phrases like Mrs. Astor maybe when they're talking about survivors, and just this almost desperate use of the word probably.
Even the company officials were in the dark. Franklin himself, he initially dismissed the sinking reports as rumors and preposterous.
And that was as late as 10:30 in the morning after the sinking. It took a full, agonizing day for that incomprehensible truth to really land.
What's also key here is how quickly that tragedy translated into real regulatory change. The death toll just exposed these massive failures in safety protocol.
Oh, immediately. The disaster forced immediate action. It created a global shift in maritime law that still has implications today. Within months, you had international agreements mandating 2047 radio watches on all passenger ships.
Because the Titanic's radio operator was off duty.
He was.
Right.
And they established the International Ice Patrol. Most crucially, regulations were passed requiring every ship to carry enough lifeboats for all people on board. The Titanic famously did not.
So the sinking didn't just end lives. It ended this kind of laissez-faire attitude toward maritime safety.
That's a great way to put it. 1912 was the year we learned technology needs regulation.
So while the West is dealing with this shock at sea, the East is facing a political shock that ended 2 millennia of tradition. February 12th, 1912, the last emperor of China abdicates.
Shantung, or as most people know him, Henry Puyi. This followed Sun Yat-sen's Republican Revolution, and it ended 267 years of Manchu rule. But if you zoom out, this was the symbolic end of 2,000 years of continuous imperial rule.
2,000 years. Just imagine the weight of that. One of the world's oldest political traditions just dissolved.
And the abdication terms were surprisingly gentle, really. The 6-year-old former emperor was actually allowed to keep his title, his property, and just continue living in the Forbidden City.
A quiet, almost anticlimactic end to such an ancient system.
And we also see the limits of human ambition reflected in exploration that same year. Just a month before the emperor's abdication, on January 17th, Robert Falcon Scott's expedition finally reaches the South Pole.
Only to find out they were too late.
Too late. The Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had beaten them by just over a month. The sources describing that discovery are just heartbreaking.
They talk about the crushing exhaustion, the disappointment.
Hmm. Scott wrote in his diary about finding Amundsen's flag, that little tent, and just realizing that this immense effort had failed to meet its ultimate goal. It's another example of 1912 just stripping away that feeling of unquestioned human triumph.
Before we pivot to the political drama in the U.S., we should probably mention a few other quick milestones.
Sure.
On January 6th, New Mexico joins the Union, 47th state. That completes the contiguous United States, which, sets the stage for the election.
Culturally, you can see modern America starting to form. On March 27th, you have the gift of the Japanese cherry trees planted along the Potomac.
A powerful symbol.
It is. And on the pop culture front, we get the Oreo cookie and the first appearance of Tarzan of the Apes.
All these markers show a new world being forged. But domestically, the real story, the one that really shaped the economic direction of the country, was that presidential election.
Indeed, it was a chaotic four-way battle. But the only reason the Democrat, Woodrow Wilson, even had a chance was because of the complete, irreparable split in the Republican Party.
A split driven by the incumbent, William Howard Taft, and former President Theodore Roosevelt.
And the rift was personal, for sure. But it fundamentally boiled down to one issue that would define the whole progressive era. How should the government manage giant corporations? Antitrust.
That was the core disagreement.
Absolutely. Taft, who represented the more traditional progressive conservatism, as he called it, he favored a strict law enforcement model.
Meaning he wanted to use the Sherman Antitrust Act to just prosecute and break up the trusts.
Exactly. Treat them like criminals that needed to be dismembered.
And this is where he just infuriated his old mentor, Roosevelt. Taft's administration filed an antitrust suit against U.S. Steel.
And the suit argued that Roosevelt, years earlier, had been misled when he approved one of the company's acquisitions.
Roosevelt saw this as a direct public attack.
On his integrity, on his legacy. It implied he'd been foolish, or maybe even corrupt. That personal fury is what fueled his decision to challenge Taft.
And in February 1912, he makes the announcement,
declaring, famously, "My hat is in the ring."
The split becomes final at that Republican convention in Chicago. Taft's allies controlled the party machinery.
And they used it. They seated these delegates from the southern rotten boroughs.
Wait, can we just clarify that term for a second? A rotten borough here means what exactly?
Right, good question. So it refers to areas, mostly in the South, where the Republican Party had almost no popular support, but they were still given delegate seats at the convention.
So Taft's machine used these easily controlled delegates to lock down the nomination?
It was a rigged fight. When Roosevelt's supporters realized the fix was in, they just stormed out of the hall shouting that famous cry, "Steamroller."
And the Bull Moose Party is born.
Yes. Roosevelt delivers this fiery speech, casting their crusade in almost religious terms. His rallying cry was, "We stand at Armageddon and we battle for the Lord."
That is not typical election language.
Not at all. It signals this is a philosophical war.
And that war centered on two competing progressive visions, which, as you mentioned, still frame our debates today. It was Roosevelt's new nationalism versus Woodrow Wilson's new freedom.
Yes, and we really need to dig into the mechanics of these two ideas.
Let's start with Roosevelt. What was new nationalism?
So the critical part of Roosevelt's platform was that he accepted that large trusts were not only inevitable, but in some cases indispensable for industrial efficiency.
He thought they were necessary to compete on the global stage.
Correct. So instead of breaking them up, which he saw as wasteful, he proposed a regulatory model. He wanted a powerful federal agency, a National Industrial Commission, to oversee these trusts.
And it would tell businesses what was legal in advance, so the government would regulate monopoly to make it stable and, quote, good.
That sounds incredibly powerful. What was the risk that Wilson and his allies saw in that, the potential for regulatory capture?
Precisely. Wilson, the Democrat, was heavily influenced by the jurist Louis Brandeis, and he ran on this New Freedom platform. He argued that if you let trusts become permanent, the massive bureaucracy needed to manage them would just inevitably be corrupted by them.
So he rejected Roosevelt's vision.
He did. He said he did not look forward with pleasure to the time when the juggernauts are licensed and driven by commissioners of the United States. Instead, Wilson focused on regulating competition.
So preventing monopolies from forming in the first place.
Exactly. It's the difference between regulating the size of the field versus regulating the behavior of the biggest players already on it.
And when Wilson won, He put that new freedom into practice with some major legislation.
Right, the Clayton Antitrust Act and the Federal Trade Commission Act of 1914. This is where the rubber meets the road.
So what did the Clayton Act do?
It supplemented the Sherman Act by explicitly forbidding certain practices like price discrimination, and it made it much easier for the government to block anti-competitive mergers. It was all about stopping monopoly before it formed.
And the Federal Trade Commission Act created the FTC.
An agency designed specifically to police unfair methods of competition. So that choice in 1912, regulating the trust or regulating competition, is the ghost that haunts every legislative session about big tech today.
We can't forget the fourth candidate, though. Eugene V. Debs, the socialist.
Right. He saw both Wilson and Roosevelt's platforms as just watered-down distractions.
Debs was a fascinating figure. He claimed all three of them, Wilson, Roosevelt, and Taft, were financed by the trusts. He basically accused Roosevelt of stealing his socialist ideas to make them safer for the establishment.
He had a great line about it, didn't he?
He did. He said, Theodore Roosevelt now alludes to me as Brother Debs as I do not acknowledge the new relation.
And despite having almost no money, he got 6% of the vote.
6%, the highest ever for a socialist candidate in a U.S. election. It just shows the sheer variety of ideologies in play in 1912.
The campaign season itself was just pure drama. I mean, the assassination attempt on Roosevelt on October 14th.
In Milwaukee, John Schrank, a saloon keeper, shoots him in the chest at close range.
It's just a miracle he survived. The bullet was slowed by his steel eyeglass case and that thick, 50-page speech manuscript he was carrying.
And Roosevelt, being an experienced hunter, knew exactly what happened. He figured since he wasn't coughing up blood, the bullet hadn't hit his lung.
So he refused to go to the hospital.
He insisted on delivering his 90-minute speech first. He walks onto the stage, blood seeping through his shirt, and delivers one of the most famous opening lines ever.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose.
You just can't make this stuff up. That physical demonstration of will must have resonated hugely.
Oh, for sure. And adding to the chaos, Taft's running mate, Vice President James S. Sherman, dies of nephritis just a week before the election. The incumbent ticket literally didn't have a VP on Election Day, a final, grim signal of the Republican Party's total disarray.
So what does this all mean for the result on November 5th?
The Republican split was everything. It handed the election to Woodrow Wilson. He won 40 states and a massive 435 electoral votes.
But here's a crucial insight from the data. Wilson got that electoral landslide with only 41.8% of the popular vote.
The lowest share for a winner since Lincoln in 1860, the split was so profound that a minority candidate won a historic majority in the Electoral College.
And conversely, Roosevelt's third-party run was incredibly successful. He got 27.4% of the popular vote, 88 electoral votes.
Still the most successful third-party run in U.S. history.
And Taft. His result remains the worst popular vote performance for any major party nominee. He only carried Vermont and Utah.
It was the only election since 1860 where 4 candidates all got more than 5% of the vote. A true watershed moment.
Before we wrap up, we should circle back to 2 more quick global events from 1912.
The Stockholm Olympics and the rising conflict in Europe.
Right. At the Olympics, the Native American athlete Jim Thorpe was a superstar. He won gold in both the pentathlon and the decathlon.
But then it all became a scandal.
He was stripped of his medals for eligibility issues. It turned out he'd played some minor professional baseball years earlier. It really highlights the rigid, often hypocritical rules about amateurism back then.
And finally, 1912 contained some very ominous foreshadowing for the world. While the U.S. was focused on its internal politics, the First Balkan War kicked off on October 17th.
Serbia, Greece, and others declared war on the Ottoman Empire. The resulting armistice was short-lived, but the sources make it clear. This was the kindling for a much larger conflict.
It destabilized the Ottoman Empire and exposed the conflicting interests of the major European powers.
It was a dress rehearsal for 1914.
So if we look back at the whole picture for you, 1912 was truly a year of reckoning. Technological overconfidence dies with the Titanic, leading directly to new global regulations.
And American political certainties were just shattered by that Republican split, creating the Bull Moose Party.
And that political clash between Wilson's new freedom and Roosevelt's new nationalism, it fundamentally framed the modern debate over government and industry.
It really did. It set the entire trajectory for how we manage large corporations, an argument that remains front and center today.
It's remarkable how that one specific failure of political unity led to such a sweeping electoral change and a permanent legislative legacy.
Hmm.
So, to leave you with a final thought, consider this historical irony. The most successful third party candidate in U.S. history, Theodore Roosevelt, actually enabled the victory of the man, Woodrow Wilson, whose core philosophy was fundamentally opposed to his own.
A fascinating paradox.
It is. So, if the Republican Party hadn't split over that U.S. Steel antitrust suit, would our entire antitrust system today look completely different? Would we have powerful, centralized agencies managing industry instead of focusing on free market competition? It's a question of what path history might have taken.